There is an adage that says, if you don't succeed, try again. But what happens if you do succeed? Do you continue to succeed again and again? Blake Johnson has the distinction of being one of those guys who seems to turn everything he touches into gold. A visionary and a serial founder, Blake built his companies to over $1 billion valuation. In fact, it doesn't seem to matter the industry. Whatever Blake sets his mind on becomes the next big thing. I'm Mike Kading, and welcome to Zero to Unicorn, where we dive into the lives of the unique visionaries among us that have made $1 billion impact in the world. Blake Johnson has done some amazing things, like building his company to over $1 billion valuation. But how does a journey like his begin?
In 2005, I became an accidental entrepreneur. I was asked to join a company and they made me an offer that seemingly at the time was too good to be true, which I diverted my plans and joined up with a company in a 50% equity stake in a relatively small finance company in Los Angeles. And I really could have cut my teeth throughout all that. But most importantly, we had this crazy trajectory in 2006 and 7, and being a finance company at the end of 08 and 09 got kicked in the teeth. And I always say it was really starting in 2009, I started my learning and business career, even though, the company had done really well. Prior to that, we had such strong tailwinds that we were doing well. And I look back at that, we were doing well and not really knowing why we were doing well. It was right place, right time. But as somebody wisely once said, when the tide goes out, you see who's wearing pants. It was one of these things that, and starting in 09, I got religion on what companies were doing well and what companies weren't, and why respectively each were doing so, and became kind of a student of business fundamentals and really understanding what constitutes strong businesses.
The accidental entrepreneur? That's not what I've heard before. Of course, I had to ask Blake to expand on this a little.
Come out of school in the late 90s out of college, and had taken a job at the 800-pound gorilla in the industry. I was hired with dozens and dozens of other guys and women that did my job. Fresh out of school, had the rose-colored glasses on, got hired in a sales capacity, which meant I had to go prospect and find businesses that needed money and basically kind of negotiate the deals and the legal terms and the credit and everything else. It was a pretty grueling job, 12 to 14 hours a day, extremely high turnover. I was hired in a class of 60 people. At the end of the first year, there was only 2 of us left. And at the end of the second year, I was the only one left. But I did really well with the job. I always came from a farming community. I always kind of joke that I brought the blue-collared work ethic to the white-collared environment. But the real trick on that was that I was able to figure out inbound deals that were coming through the receptionist, and cut a deal with the receptionist to get all the leads. And it really catapulted my career. And, I came out of 18 months into the job, I became the highest producer in the company, which, competing with guys that have been doing it for a decade plus and had big books of business, people were kind of turning their heads trying to figure out what I was doing. But subsequently stayed at that company for a number of years. It was a great training ground. I learned a tremendous amount about corporate finance and credit, underwriting and legal and sales and the whole gamut. And so I had plans to go up to grad school in the Bay Area in California. And as I was exiting the company, it made, news within the industry. I was 27 years old at the time. And a company out of Los Angeles approached me to help consult them in my transition. I subsequently did. The CEO is very charming and persistent. And over the course of a few months, finally got to the place where he said, I want you on. What's it going to take? I had no plans to join a relatively small company, but B, eject from the grad school path. And to almost make him go away, I said 50% of the equity of your company, thinking he was going to tell me to kick rocks and we'd be done with it. And 3 days later, he came back and said, I thought about it and willing to do it. And so I became an accidental entrepreneur. I started full-time a few months after that on January 1st, 2005. I was very good at the revenue side and generating revenue within these types of companies. They were doing an average run rate of about $5 million. We got it up to about $100 million within 18 months. I would argue it was a good trade for him, good for me. But also we were at I always give the analogy, that company was a beautiful Ferrari, but when you opened up the hood, there was two sick mice in a hamster wheel, meaning, we made a lot of money, but, fundamentally we didn't have the right business metrics and the right mindset to really grow a business beyond that. And so when the tides quickly shifted, and for us, that was at the Q4 2008, the company was not positioned well to withstand any kind of turbulence and, really get through what subsequently was the next 2 years of grueling, labor. My business partner ejected from the company. He called me one day and said, I'm not coming back. Let's file bankruptcy. I said, from a small town, that's not really kind of how we approach things. I'm not willing to walk away from all the commitments that we were committed, both personally and corporately, from a corporate standpoint, pretty deep. And so he left, never came back, and I did what constituted a 2-year workout on the business successfully at the end. Got down to my last $7,000 to my name, but pulled it off, and most importantly, didn't leave anybody high and dry, which really later came back to benefit me in later years, because a lot of the banks have a long memory, and they knew I did right by everybody and were willing to, grant me certain permissions in the years to come that they weren't normally doing for anybody, because I kind of stood tall during the tough times. But I really, really, such a painful experience going through that, swore that I would never be in that situation again. And, the blessing at the time for me was that I was unable to raise money to bail ourselves out. And I was left, to my own ingenuity and own kind of grit and persistence to figure out a solution. And because of that, really got sober and got religion on the fundamentals of business and what constitutes strong businesses and why businesses last and can grow. Subsequently, I took those learnings to the next company and the next company after that, each time learning more and more. And each time, kind of building upon that and leveraging the position up and the learnings up to the next one. And, Currency was a huge success prior to Byte. But really was sober on all that.
But that receptionist story doesn't end there. I know there is more to this story. In fact, I heard that the CEO found out about their arrangement.
Yeah, sure. It was the CEO. And so I've always taken the philosophy of do the hard work and learn to do the hard work and enjoy the hard work, but also try to figure out the areas that are often overtimes overlooked of opportunity along the way. I learned that early on and working on the feedlot, having to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and working cattle all day in the 120 degree heat, my hometown of El Centro, California. And that's a great story as well, how I learned that. But to answer your question and to address the topic, I was banging my head, making 300 cold calls a day and asking myself on a daily basis, what can I do or what can I create to shortcut the process? And I realized that, the company at the time had such a big brand, and it was generating a lot of inbound traffic, unsolicited or probably, generated from some awareness of these small businesses in the years past, but businesses were calling in without an account rep associated with it. And the receptionist was sprinkling out the calls to all the reps in a very uniform way. And I noticed that, a lot of the reps were taking these leads and not doing much with them. They didn't have the skill set nor kind of desire to kind of persist through and do the things. And so, one day I approached her and asked her to have a beer at the local pub after work. And I pitched her the idea. I said, look, you're farming out all these leads. How can we get these all coming to me? And we came, over the course of probably a few more beers and maybe a tequila shot, we came to an agreement. And that went really well. Business started to pick up for me dramatically. And then she got fired. So then I had to go to the next receptionist, cut the same deal. She got fired, so on and so forth. So I'm now years later, onto my fifth receptionist. And as I approached the fifth receptionist, the fifth receptionist went to the CEO of the company and said, here's what Blake propositioned me with. And of course, I got called in shortly thereafter. The CEO was not happy at all. And I think he had plans to maybe, if not severely discipline me, fire me on the spot. As I was, being read the riot act, it was the scene out of, Full Metal Jacket. I felt like I was one of the guys in there being yelled at by the drill sergeant.
You trying to squeeze an inch in on me somewhere, huh? Sir, no, sir!
I stopped him and I said, his name was Sean. I said, Sean, do you know how lucky you are that I did this for your company? And he paused, steam coming out of the ears. And I explained to him that had I not done this, those leads would have gone to all these other people and not closed it at a high enough rate and not injected enough margin into the deals and so forth and so on. And he paused and he said, get out of my office. So I went back to my office and was kind of sitting there for an hour or so. And his assistant came in very coldly, very quietly and said, from now on, you don't have to pay for any of the leads anymore. They're yours indefinitely. And she just turned around and walked out, and I never had to pay for leads again, throughout my kind of tenure with the company. It was just the main recipient of all these leads. So, it worked out. I do believe to this day I was creating a win-win for all parties.
I love that. Blake is one gutsy individual, and I don't know if I could bet my career on a move like that. But that's what makes Blake so unique, so special. It's his tenacity. But I needed to know, what was it that Blake was doing so differently?
I thought about that a lot. And, even with my own companies here in Los Angeles, I've hired over 10,000 people through the subsequent number of companies. And so, for better, for worse, you grow, pretty strong opinions on who's going to do well and who's not. And I think, at the end of the day, what factored in for me and what factors in for a lot of other people you see this with is just persistence. Persistence is a key, and having to prove something, a little bit of a chip on the shoulder, that age-old term of grit, however you want to define that. But at the end of the day, it's not having a place to retreat to. Because we hired so many people out of college and relatively, early on in their careers, you can smell pretty early on if it doesn't work out for them at whatever job this is, what are they going to go back to? And if their retreat position, whether it be parents or a spouse that maybe it makes money or whatever it is, if that's an easy thing to go back to, when times become tough, when push comes to shove, it's human nature. You're going to go back to it. And these great outcomes and great achievements take getting kicked in the teeth a number of times. And, my family, my dad says this, my kids say this, we just keep shoveling. You got to keep shoveling. It's funny. I think that came from my dad early on. He's a cattle rancher. And, you just got to keep going. And then recently I was watching something online and I saw Ronald Reagan tell a joke during his presidency. He's like, you just got to keep shoveling. There's a pony in there somewhere. So, we kind of have that, but that persistence and just the belief that, there's a solution is, I think, really critical. and wanting the desired outcome, whatever that is. If you see it in athletics, you see it in business, you see it in any industry, in any career. But the folks that ultimately got to get to the top of the heap and have those storied careers and outcomes that everybody wants, the common denominator is they were just focused and persistent and wouldn't accept another alternative. And when roadblocks came, when hurdles came, they have that ability to look at it and say, what's the way around this? How can I overcome this stumbling block and keep on going?
Well, wait a second. Blake just said that he had a ranch experience. You can't just gloss over that when we're talking about a billion-dollar journey. I just had to ask, what was that experience like? The experience of being a cattle rancher? And what were the lessons taken from the feedlot all the way to the border?
Sure. Yeah, I was like I said, my dad is in the industry. At an early age, he thought it was good. I hated it at the time, but he thought it was appropriate around 12, 13 years old that I go work for another feedlot. And feedlot is, people say a cattle ranch. Cattle ranches sound romantic and sexy. A feedlot is the exact opposite. It's horrid. And so I was getting picked up by an old cowboy, Fred Crook from Wyoming, down in my hometown of El Centro, California, and at 3:05 in the morning, and every day I wasn't in school. And so he would drive out. I had to start work at 4 a.m. during the summers and a little bit later during the winters, and it was hot. El Centro is one of the hottest places. It would routinely hit 120 plus. And, and it's predominantly predominantly 97% Hispanic. And so, growing up down there with, being the only one with blue eyes around was not exactly easy. It was, there was no favoritism, quite the opposite, for a guy with blue eyes. And so I knew that, and going into the first year, I got relegated to the worst of worst jobs, which accounted to taking a 5-gallon, empty paint bucket and scooping out the troughs. And the troughs, were a, combination of about 50% water, 25% urine, 25% feces, because the cattle would jump in these troughs and stand in there to cool off all day. So I would just throw a net over my head to keep out the flies and scoop out 8 hours a day troughs. And there was 117 troughs, and I got it starting Monday morning. I got done, it took me all day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and half of Friday to get through the 117. And and no joke, Mike, I could come back from work and my Wrangler jeans would stand up by themselves, and my white Hanes t-shirt was black. And so I just kept to myself. I just kept working, kept shoveling. And the crew is about 30 Mexican guys. The vast majority were coming over, crossing the border from Mexicali, 10 miles to the south. And, they kind of finally took a liking to me the second year. And I knew I made it when I got invited to lunch, which was at 8 a.m. in the morning, right? The first time. And so, I just kind of quietly sat there, and they would cook whatever they killed that morning, whether it be a rattlesnake or on good days, a little calf would die and they would cut it up and so forth and so on. And so one of the days, I don't remember when, but the manager came over and he asked me, he goes, Blake, if you were me and you had to pick one of these guys, and the whole group was over there, to do the job, like to the best of my satisfaction, do it the most intelligent way, who would you pick? And I knew these guys pretty well. And I said, I'll pick, that guy. And he's like, why would you pick him? I'm like, well, he's kind of the natural leader, and he's always at work on time. He works really hard, and I gave him kind of a feel-good list. And he shakes his head and starts walking away. And I'm like, hold on, who would you pick? And keep in mind, everybody was to my right, and there was one single guy, and it was a character out of a movie. This guy was, huge, right? And dirty. And there was a guy sleeping under a little tree, taking a nap in the dirt. He's like, I'd pick that guy. I said, why the hell would you pick that guy? He goes, that guy is so lazy that his brain works in a different way. And then he started to name off all of these inventions that were particular to this feedlot, from a pulley system to move bales of hay, to a siphon system to cheat the system that I'd been doing with the bucket. I was like, why the hell did you not tell me about the siphon system a year ago? To suck out all the manure and crap from the water troughs and so forth and so on. And I remember that distinctly. And then as he's walking away again, he goes, look, in your life, if you work like the guy you picked and think like the guy I picked, you're going to do well in life. And so I've always tried to kind of keep that in mind. And it's really been the catalyst and the genesis for a lot of things that I've subsequently invented or tried to work out. Case in point, the lead system.
That's just fantastic. What an attitude to take, and one that stayed with Blake all of this time. Now, moving on, I wanted to jump to the next company in Blake's illustrious career, a company which he took from a $5 million valuation all the way to $100 million. Yes, you heard me correctly, a $100 million valuation. That doesn't happen accidentally. So how does one make that a reality?
We did that. I mean, if you think about revenue generation in any company, right? The key to revenue generation is marketing. It's how many eyeballs, how frequent, can you get your product in front of somebody, and the subsequent close rates and conversion rates of those theoretical eyeballs. And so a lot of companies have that in mind. It's more difficult to do it within a financial parameters where that cost per acquisition, the CAC, the CPA, the customer acquisition cost, customer, unit, whatever you want to define it as, fits within your metrics. And so early on, I kind of got really sober that how can you get more eyeballs and how can you get more people interested in your products? And so what we ultimately devised in there and in that first company, which took it, from in such a dramatic fashion, 20x the revenue within 18 months, was rooted in marketing. And in this particular case, we were soliciting business loans from the small to medium-sized businesses and industries, far and wide within the US. And we devised a methodology to where we had a marketing piece. It was an actual credit card that was sent out, to 9 million businesses a year, offering them lines of credit and encouraging them to call in based to activate the credit card in a direct mail fashion. Direct mail, it kind of gone out of style, so to speak. And we brought it kind of back in. And, there was so many in particular small details on how we treated those leads and how we got those leads convert. But we were now able to canvas the US in a much more dramatic fashion than we had traditionally done through outreach and cold calls and warm calls and, vendor relationships of these bigger institutional companies that sold large equipment like John Deere, or some of the medical equipment companies or kitchen equipment companies, et cetera, et cetera. So really it was rooted in a very good marketing piece.
That doesn't happen accidentally. So how does that happen?
We had, and even through my old company, I'd seen them try a lot of things. And I always kind of had this idea about direct mail. I actually tried to bring it to my first company, and nobody really got excited about it. But when it kind of had, my own path to run, we started small and watched, the conversion, and then doubled it. And it's still converting the same, doubled that again. So there's exponential growth. And we really maintain that as long as our conversion percentages held.
With results as outstanding as these, I needed to know, did Blake try a number of marketing initiatives, or did he just strike gold out of the gate?
With CapNet, we were doing very well. The marketing piece was working. We were able to hire the people to field sales calls, hire the credit analysts, hire the funders. It was gale force wind, and not only our backs, but the backs of everybody in the industry. And at the end of 2008, unbeknownst to us, and we were pretty much a middleman. We were this, taking money from big institutional banks and we're buying it for a specific cost, finding the customers and selling it for a cost higher than that, and then making the spread and the margin ourselves. Unbeknownst to us at the time, these bigger institutional banks were having severe problems. And at the end of 2008, the credit facilities on a industry-wide scale did not get approved. People were, feeling a lot of pain in the financial markets. And these banks, instead of saying, okay, we're going to continue to participate in 2009, said, we're going to sit this quarter out, or now subsequent 2 quarters. And that was in the best case scenario. Some of them were performing so poorly, they had to close their own doors. But we had a tremendous amount of demand for our product. The businesses still needed money. We did not have supply. And when we didn't have supply, that really, turned us upside down. So I had hundreds of employees at the time, big offices in Arizona and all parts of California and et cetera, et cetera. And so when we didn't have the supply of funds from these bigger institutions, it really, rocked not only our world, but our industry's world. And the vast majority of businesses, went out of business in our industry in 2009. And it was then I really, again, got religion on a lot of things, but deeply understood the importance of portfolio performance, not only with my own stuff, but with everybody's stuff. I often, even today, had, Guggenheim bankers in from New York just yesterday, and spent all day with them. And one of them marveled, they're like, you worry about our numbers more than we worry about our numbers. And I said, it's a whole ecosystem here that everything has to piece well together for capital to flow in the right, appropriate, responsible manner.
That's fantastic. One thing I love about Blake's story, and the truth of everybody's story who makes it big, is that they all have one thing in common, and that's that they've experienced a lot of big failures. Toward the end of his tenure with the second company, Blake faced a big challenge. I asked him to dive into this in a little bit more detail.
Those years really were very difficult. I didn't take a day off of work for 3.5 years, not a Saturday nor a Sunday. And I got down at some point and I was doing it by myself at that point. And I got down to my last $7,000 to my name. And I had a payroll 2 weeks later of $43,000. I mean, in those 2 weeks, the whole world shifted for me. I think we made $60,000, and I slowly started to build out, and it went well after that. But I was a payroll cycle away from losing everything. And most importantly, I was going to lose, my infrastructure, which I knew had value. We had spent a lot of money to build up the infrastructure of the companies, and, software, and computers and phone systems and cubicles and all these things. But, that period was a tough period. I figure I'm a pretty durable guy, but there was one point where I woke up and I've cried 3 times in the last 30 years. Once when my grandmother died, and once I had an older brother pass away recently. And one night in 2009, I woke up my wife at, not intentionally, at 2:00 in the morning. I was weeping in bed thinking I was going to lose everything. We were going to lose our house and everything else. And so it took a toll. But I also think now, looking back, it was necessary, completely necessary in my evolution. And had I not gone through that, it wouldn't have yielded the things later in life, that in the outcomes.
I want to think about this for a second. When you're going through a downturn, when you're up against bankruptcy, but you're fighting through it, what are those years really like? And what lessons did Blake learn from his experience?
I learned what I constantly refer to as the fundamentals. I learned simply that revenue needs to exceed expenses, and that, there are certain fallacies in building businesses that have become popular in recent years and decades of raising money and patting yourself for more revenue and more expenses, and not running a profitable company is not healthy. We always focus on two fundamentals in our businesses. First and most important is customer satisfaction and an excellent customer journey. The second is profitability. And maybe there's a third. I'm sure I can make one up, but those are the two things we preach about. And if you ask anybody in any of these companies, what are your two core principles? Those are those two. And I've learned that, it's a puzzle, and your business is a puzzle, and you got to get pieces right. And there's specific departments and things that are defined. When I kind of think about a business, as simple as it sounds, and it's, if you have 100% of the pie, you want to make a 20% margin. Okay. That leaves you 80%. Where does that 80% go? I know for me and my models that my customer acquisition cost, my marketing spend to acquire a customer, should be around 20%. My cost of goods should be around 25%, right? And I think if you add all that up, if I'm getting the math right, that's 65%, then you got to run the rest of the company on 35%. And if one's teetering more or less, it affects the others. But at the end of the day, those all have to equal 100%. And, and then complemented with that is scalability of a business. If you can get the per unit profitability right, then you focus on scalability. And we gravitate towards large addressable markets. I need to, in order for me to get into a business, I need 2 or 3 big, well-funded players above me. I don't want to be the first one. I want to kind of coast and take a lot of the momentum and learnings from well-funded businesses, above me, and then outmaneuver them in the trenches and on a brand level. But I could go on for hours and hours of all these things, but I just wanted to kind of hit the high level of this. But, there's a lot of learnings that came from that.
So Blake has just come out of a dark point in his life, and now things are turning around. What's going on at this juncture?
Honestly, I was so shell shocked. It was May of 2012, and I went with my wife for the first time, and we went to New York City and took a Memorial Day, weekend. And I remember walking through the park with her, and I sat on this bench in this obscure part of Central Park, and not intentionally, but I remember that, thinking, I'm like, am I really kind of out of the woods right now? Is there the gun is, that was been pressed against my temple for the last 3+ years? Is it gone? And it was such a foreign concept that it could be gone. And even today, I still have this fear of, what could go wrong. But it was certainly good, and it wasn't this aha moment of that you'd see in a movie of, the birds are chirping and the rainbow came out and people are high-fiving and hugging you. It wasn't that. It wasn't that profound to where I was trying to, think, okay, what's next? What's next? It was just this constant small iteration of, what's next? How can we get stronger? Where is it going to go wrong? I was up I had a call early this morning with a guy who we're doing a big finance deal with. And, I was worried 1 a.m. I was like, how is my contract structured? Where can I get backed into a corner? Where is somebody else going to force me into a bad decision? So that's really never turns off. I mean, it's, you look at the surface and you try to, look at it now and people are like, must be nice to, have these certain things. And, the people that know me well are like, you don't understand the price that was paid to get there.
Blake was clear about what he wanted, a profitable company. But what did he do differently as a result of his experiences?
So I was able to kind of, revive CatNet, and got it to a place where I was able to monetize it, and got some shooter capital from that. I had this idea on a different type of finance company at the time, and subsequently started that different way of underwriting deals through merchant processing, and namely how to collect monthly payments securely without the risk of default, or without as high of risk of default. I started a little company there, and it actually took off. And then at the time, somebody approached me to buy that company, and it was not a huge price, but it was enough of a price where it made sense to kind of monetize that and then take it to the next one. All the while through CatNet, we had a big portfolio and a big database of 88,000 business owners, all of which we had FICO scores on and credit reports, and we would get reports on how that portfolio was performing through the credit bureaus. And we saw this very drastic dip in the average FICO score. It was over 100 points, 102-point dip of our little, small to medium-sized business owner group. And at the start of that, I was thinking, man, FICO score is the main driver for us to approve or decline deals. We know a lot about FICO and how to, structure certain things and, keep balances on certain credit cards and avoid the common mishaps. We better start coaching these 88,000 people. And we did. We kind of threw out all this, 2009, 10, and we got so many thank you letters from that. I got more thank you letters than lending out billions of dollars into the economy and into these businesses. But we got more thank you letters in 6 months of doing this than I had in the last 8+ years, right, or more, I guess, of doing tens of thousands of transactions. And so as we gained momentum with that, I said, okay, let's see if this is a product we can kind of nominally charge and monetize, and provide the service. And then it caught on like fire. So we structured a new company to do that. Rave reviews, was moved through the 88,000 people, and we had this tremendously positive impact on the health of these business owners. And then I realized that, the average consumer could use this too. And so we spun out that company. That company grew quite big, 150 people. And in 2014, I ran a process and ended up selling that company to a private equity group out of the San Francisco area. And that was kind of my first bigger kind of 8-figure win on a company sale. And so that kind of changed my opinion on a lot of things. But that company, remember after the deal closed, I hosted a thank you dinner for the principals of the private equity group. And they, said, okay, Blake, now that the deal's closed, we've got to ask you some questions. I went, you just asked me a billion questions going through the underwriting for the last 6 months, but sure, shoot. How did you do this? We've looked at so many of these companies, but how did you get profitable so quickly? And how did you not raise money? And I said, I didn't have any other option. It was this or nothing. And I knew I wanted to provide a good consumer experience, and I wanted to have a profitable company. And those two mandates forced me to kind of think outside of the traditional structure in that world, and really, really kind of create something of value.
That's so clever. It's so simple. What Blake is doing here is tapping into human nature by building his connection first. His sales funnel begins with people. It begins with relationships. This is what helped Blake make an 8-figure exit, which is incredible, by the way. Next, I asked Blake to walk me through the story of how he fed this into his next venture.
So with Currency, had a big win. Yeah. So with Currency, this fourth company, sold that company right around 100 million. Used a lot of that capital to leverage into Byte. At the time, when I was saying I was going from one discipline from finance into orthodontics, people thought I was crazy. I think Vegas odds pegged my success rate at like 0.0001. It was just a foreign concept. But what people didn't know is is I had done my homework and modeled out the company, and the DNA between an equipment leasing company and an orthodontic company were 98% the same, by design. And so currency was obviously a tremendous win. It closed in January of 2017. Then had, a little bit more kind of shooter capital to now go leverage up into Byte, which we started 2 months later. Byte was a, 3.5-year run, with all the learnings and scars and everything else from the prior companies. We had a very smooth trajectory on the surface and were able to capitalize on it. But we took all the learnings from prior companies and vowed not to repeat the mistakes. I always say we've done thousands of things right and hundreds of thousands of things wrong. And one thing we never do is make the same mistake twice. So we're constantly learning. But really that gave us the kind of the power and the momentum to jump into Byte and put our heads down. And then obviously Byte sold for over $1 billion in cash. We didn't not have any investors. And so just the team in itself, and there was 32 people that became millionaires that day. So we've been very liberal with sweat equity in our businesses and really tried to align, interest and incentives and make everybody an owner. But it was a great exit. We reveled in not what it did for us. Truthfully, it didn't really feel much different at all, but to see the changes in the team and what that did for them, that's pretty addictive. It keeps us coming back to do more.
That's great, but I really wanted to know, how did Blake start researching for Byte? How did he figure out that this was the right course of action? This obviously wasn't in Blake's background, and yet he chooses Byte.
Fortuitous story that happened. It was funny kind of fate maybe intervened on this one. It was December of 2015, and I knew currency was kind of getting to the point where we were about to hire the investment bank and take that year-long process to sell. And I'm always, when that happens with each business, I'm always thinking about, okay, what are we going to do next? So I get to work on trying to find something. It takes a while sometimes. After currency, I was striking out for 6 months. I'm sorry, not after currency, but after Byte, I spent 6 months kind of being depressed because I couldn't find anything that we were going to jump into. We subsequently jumped into Alter. But it was December 2015, and I just met this guy kind of randomly, and he was an orthodontist and a professor of orthodontics at University of Southern California here, and he was from Spain. He just moved with his wife into the Los Angeles area. Randomly came across him, and he's like, "I'm new in town, and would love to go out to dinner with Blake, with you and your wife." And I said, okay, certainly if I was moving to Spain, would want somebody to show me the ropes. And so we went out to dinner with him, had a nice dinner. Didn't really think I was ever going to see the guy again, but felt like I did my duty, so forth and so on. And I randomly come across him 3 weeks later, and he looks horrible. Face is white. He was just so sad. I looked at him, I'm like, yeah, is everything okay? Oh, Blake, this thick Spanish accent, which I love, but I don't have that power to do perfect accents. My wife just left me. We've been together since the 7th grade. And I'm like, what happened? She took a new job in LA and fell in love with her boss. I'm like, this happened in 3 weeks? And told me she was leaving me. Like, man, okay, here's a guy who just moved into town. His heart got ripped out. I got to help him. So we adopted him. And he was at the house all the time. We walked in and would say hi to my kids and my dog before I got a nod. And so he's spending a lot of time with us. And then, one day, and he's a big sushi fan, loves sushi. He said, I got a new place to take you to sushi. I said, all right, I'll meet you. And halfway through dinner, he goes, Blake, not only did my wife leave me, but I'm going to be out of business in 8 to 10 years from now. I'm like, you're an orthodontist. People are going to be indefinitely needing their teeth straightened, especially teens. What do you mean? He goes, the advancements in my industry on two parts. These invisible aligners that Invisalign is doing are game changer. They're able to move teeth in the mild to moderate cases, which is about 80% of his business, better than traditional wires and brackets. And software predicting movements of the teeth are now doing a better job and more accurate than, call it the artist, what I do, and saying, oh, I think, this tooth needs to move this month and that one next month. And he goes, the software is shortening the treatment times by 70% in some cases. I said, man, sorry, sucks. What else can you do? He goes, not only that, but the Invisalign patent is wearing off in about 18 months from now, in October of 2017. And there's going to be a point in the not too distant future where the 80% of these cases, a dentist can treat remotely. And I said, hold on. You're telling me the patent's wearing off, the dentist can treat remotely, and the technology from an aligner standpoint and the software standpoint creates a superior result? Yes. And so the light bulb went on, and at that, I'd call my dad on the drive home, that night. I said, I know what I'm going to do next. I'm going into orthodontics. So that was the genesis of that.
So as Blake is building up Bite and scaling up the business, you get to a point where you start to surely think, I'm done. It's time for me to pull back. But how does this realization happen? What changes?
So it's interesting. There's a age-old, saying that, you sell when you can, not when you want to. And I've seen entrepreneurs and people start successful businesses, and a couple things happen that we try to not fall into this category. And not to say it's wrong, but the owner or owners of the business, the company really becomes their identity. And they, believe that it's going to grow year after year after year. And they said, okay, if I can hit this revenue or this profitability, then I'll sell. We don't do that at all. We say, we're going to spend 18 months in the garage developing it. We're going to get out to market. We're going to spend the next 6 months, month 19 to 24. And we're in this right now with our friends and family. We launched the friends and family. We call it the tell us how much we suck period, and working out all the bugs with the product. And then starting month kind of 24, we start to really put our foot on the gas and scale the marketing. Month 36 or so, we start to, month 30 or so, or in that time period, we start to think about exiting. And so our goal is to really get out, within 4.5 years from start to finish. And if that means we are on a, $100 million run rate, so be it. If it means we're on a $300 million run rate, so be it. So, we're going to work like hell to, build the engine and really try to exit within a specific time period. It is a very different skill set in the United States, whereby, what it takes to get from zero, call it 250 million in revenue or 300 million in revenue as we define it, to get it from 300 to $1 billion is a completely different team, mindset, discipline, et cetera, to get it from 300 to $1 billion. That is not us. We do not perform well, because what's made us good at the first part will make us bad at the next part. And we're very sober about that. And we're very happy to, hand the baton off to a bigger balance sheet, different team who are specifically focused on taking what we've done and getting it, 3x from there.
That's amazing. I just wanted to take a moment to break down what Blake said there. Exit when you can, not when you want to. There's a real strength in knowing your limits. Blake knows his parameters, the area where he exceeds, but more importantly, he knows when to pass the torch to the right team to take the business to the next level.
it's just really kind of goes to scalability. It goes to building systems and operations and regulatory and legal and da 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 da. There's a lot of different requirements, and it really requires a much different organization in terms of mindset. We're getting there, build it strong, build it so somebody can take what we've done and add on all the components that pretty much already exist in those companies. When Dinsupply Saperona bought Byte, it's been the star pupil for them over the last few years. It's 50% year-over-year growth. I mean, they are so happy with the acquisition, but we couldn't have done what they've done. We simply couldn't. As much as I like to think for a millisecond that we could have, it doesn't happen, because in order for it to go to that level at that scale, the amount of all these mundane things, but still very difficult, the systems and the people that need to support HR, marketing, hiring, regulatory, legal, supply chain, all these things. They moved, manufacturing from Oklahoma and Shanghai to Mexicali, in my hometown, right? Mexicali happens to, nobody knows this, be the orthodontic capital of the universe. Every big company is headquartered, has a big presence in Mexicali. That's the only thing down there that's not farming. But ironically, we didn't have the balance sheet to make the proper moves in order to get it to that next level.
Here, Blake piqued my curiosity, not in the numbers, but in the feeling. What did it feel like getting to the point of being able to sell Byte for over $1 billion, knowing what Blake came through to get there?
It's still surreal. And to be blunt, I still have a difficult time connecting the dots. I think it was kind of beat up so bad for those years and I got so close to recognizing I was going to lose everything, that you never lose that anymore. And so, the joys of selling Byte, it didn't really hit me for a few years. It'll be 3 years this December. And I think just recently it's kind of set in that it's done and it's there, and that might put me into a different category. But I still kind of can create some story in my mind how it's all going to go away. You hear this in different ages, right? Throughout different periods of history. And it's real, it's real because it didn't set in. I mean, the company sold that day and I obviously saw, bank balance go up. And when I tell you it didn't create 1 ounce of joy in me, I took a lot of joy from seeing my team, and the stories that came from that were so great, but it didn't move me at all. And thankfully, I think I've been happy since I was a teenager, and my level of happiness throughout all this stuff has been a fairly appreciative and happy person. And but it doesn't look like it does in the movies, right? It's not like this aha moment. Maybe it is for some people. Certainly it was not for me. Try to focus on giving back. Recently, I was honored recently out of the blue. I was not anticipating this, but Los Angeles Philanthropist of the Year for this last year. And so there have been these, tangible things that I've seen that this has enabled, in the community and provided more opportunity for others and things that I can logically, say that's good and it feels good. But the emotion is still looking over my shoulder.
Many people believe that if you have $1 billion in your bank account, that then you will have it made. But Blake said something that I won't soon forget. When the money hit his account, he said that he felt nothing. It just goes to show that this dream of being an entrepreneur is not about the goal. It's not about the dollars in your bank account, but rather it's about the journey, the purpose, and the people you impact along the way. As we get a little closer to time, I quizzed Blake on where he's going next. What is his next big move?
Right or wrong, we said we're going to do 2 last businesses. And as I indicated, you got it earlier in this, we launched Alter. It's Alter, ALTER, me.com. Excited about that. Excited. I think it has the potential to go even bigger than Byte and have really profound impact on the masses, which will bring and commoditize what's been somewhat esoteric and somewhat kind of reserved to, let's call it the 1%, and really bring it into middle America and into the homes, and for that matter, other countries as well. Alter is in-home connected fitness, where we will sell you a device much like the Peloton, or it's not a bike, but it's a mirror that goes into your home, but it's based upon your DNA and your biometrics. So we give you a device that you wear, much like, some of these wearables, where it's tracking all your biometrics on a daily basis and in a real-time basis, cultivating your workout and exercise, regime, tailored specifically to you. So if it's your birthday and you maybe had one too many glasses of wine and you didn't sleep well that night, it would recognize that and change up your workouts, maybe yoga or stretching the next day, as opposed to hitting you hard with a cardio workout. And the accountability and based on the genetic piece that truly is revolutionary that's coming in. Hired a team out of Oxford in England, and they really, which Oxford is the genome sequencing capital of the world, and they were really able to cultivate and which they already had been doing, studying how your specific DNA impacts your body responding to exercise. And so we assembled all that and excited to see, how that's going to do. We devised a new type of finance company whereby it's 100% approval for everybody. Doesn't matter your credit score, your age, demographic. We've flipped the math on its head. We've been doing it quietly for 3 years. The math is now proven, and excited to see how we can bring, and by the way, everybody's approved. Everybody pays the same single-digit interest rate, low interest rate, the same term, and the same monthly payment. So it doesn't matter if you're Elon Musk or you're struggling college student who maybe missed a few credit card payments, had a bad credit score. Everybody pays the same, and it works. Yeah, that's a whole nother half hour, but it's really fascinating, and we've been doing it. The auto industry had done it for a number of years, but we now have kind of commoditized it through many different industries and products. So it's pretty interesting in that regard. So those two will be the last. I hope, if we can get those done in the next, call it 3 years from today, I want to get it done by October 2026 on both companies. I set that deadline, that's it. Come hell or high water, we're got to get these done. And then I've been giving a lot of thought to what maybe after that. And my interests lie right now in starting a very specific type of school for, call it, students from 13 to 20.
Blake doesn't act like a visionary. In fact, I think he'd be embarrassed by the insinuation. But there's no denying that Blake's impact on the entrepreneur community is sizable. With Blake's focus, tenacity, and willingness to rise to the challenge, Blake has earned his success through long days and sleepless nights. As I'm finding out again and again, it takes a certain kind of mindset to succeed in the long game. But I guess that's what makes visionaries like Blake stand head and shoulders above the rest. And I, for one, am happy to learn this lesson. Thanks for listening. Keep following us on your favorite podcast app. And if you'd like to recommend us to a friend, we'd like that too.